My name is Claire, and I'm 33. The moment I stepped into the courtroom, my mother, Eleanor, shot me a look of pure disdain, a full, theatrical eye roll, the kind that practically announces, "Oh, here she comes," as if my presence was the one great inconvenience in her meticulously constructed drama of victimhood. But just then, Judge Croft froze. His gaze lifted from the documents before him, settled on my face, and you could almost hear the click as recognition dawned on him. "Wait a minute," he said, his voice slow as he placed his pen on the desk. "These charges, they're against you?" My parents had absolutely no clue who I had become, and that, right there, was the most satisfying part of it all. Where are you watching from? Let me know your city in the comments. And if you've ever felt like a ghost to your own family, hit that like and subscribe button. You're not going to want to miss what happened next. Let's rewind 3 months. My grandfather died. Judge Arthur Pierce, a man who served for 40 years on the Federal Appeals Court. He was the man who truly raised me while my parents, Eleanor and Rob, were off somewhere else, living their own lives and pretending I was a footnote they'd forgotten to write. His funeral was an event. Every notable judge, lawyer, and politician in the state was there to offer their condolences. I was the one who delivered the eulogy. My parents naturally sat in the very back. They'd arrived late and slipped out before the reception even began. It was their signature move. I hadn't laid eyes on them in nearly a decade, not since my 18th birthday when my grandmother passed away, and they made a 90-minute cameo before vanishing again. After Grandma Kate died, it was just me and Grandpa Arthur. He was 74 at the time, still razor sharp, still presiding over cases and still making it his mission to give me every advantage life could offer. Now, here's the deal with my parents. My mother got pregnant at 18 and quickly decided a baby would ruin her social life. My father was a hotshot baseball prospect with dreams of the major leagues, and a child didn't exactly fit into that picture. So they did what profoundly selfish people do. When I was 3 months old, they dropped me at my grandparents' house and essentially disappeared from my life. Sure, they'd visit, but only if the mood struck, which was usually twice a year. Christmas, and sometimes my birthday. Eleanor would sweep in wearing some expensive outfit, plant a kiss somewhere in the air next to my face, and spend her entire visit criticizing how Grandma Kate was raising me. Too indulgent, apparently. Meanwhile, Rob avoided these visits almost entirely because Grandpa Arthur had once called him a deadbeat to his face, and Rob couldn't handle the truth. So I grew up watching my father on sports channels instead. Whenever his minor league team played, Grandpa would have the game on. Not because he gave a damn about baseball, but because he wanted me to have some connection, to know my father was out there somewhere, even if he chose not to be in my life. I never felt like I was missing out, though. Grandma Kate and Grandpa Arthur gave me a world of love, the real kind, the kind that shows up. They were there for every school play, every soccer match, every single debate tournament. They were my parents in every way that truly counts. When Grandma died from a sudden heart attack, I felt like my universe had collapsed. I was 18, just about to head off to college, and the woman who was my entire world was just gone. Grandpa carried us both through that suffocating grief, and somewhere in that shared sorrow, he began to really open up to me about his work, about the meaning of justice, about the immense responsibility of wielding power. That's when the seed was planted. I decided I would follow in his footsteps. I graduated at the top of my class from law school. Grandpa was in the front row, beaming with pride. My parents? They sent a greeting card. Grandpa Arthur pulled some strings, using his considerable influence to get me a position in the prosecutor's office. I climbed the ladder quickly. It turned out I had a knack for it. By the time I was 30, I was handling major high-profile cases, intricate financial fraud, public corruption, the kind of stuff that generates headlines. My parents knew none of this. If they ever thought of me, they probably pictured me in some dull, anonymous office job. Grandpa retired when I was 27. He said he'd served his time. But the real reason was that he wanted to spend his remaining years with me. Our Sunday dinners became sacred. He taught me everything he knew about reading a room, about courtroom tactics, about how to hold on to your integrity when everyone around you is willing to trade theirs for an advantage. When he passed away peacefully in his sleep at 88, that old, familiar emptiness washed over me. But I wasn't a lost 18-year-old anymore. I was 33, and I had become the woman he'd raised me to be. The will was read a week later. I was expecting maybe his collection of legal books, his watch, some personal effects. What I received was everything. The house, the investment portfolio, the savings accounts, the life insurance. A total of $4 million. The entire estate he had spent a lifetime building, he left to me. It came with a very specific condition, detailed in a sealed letter. My dearest Claire, it began. You are reading this because I am gone, but my love for you is not. You were the greatest joy of my life. I leave you everything because you have earned it, not by blood, though you are my blood, but by showing up, by loving me and your grandmother when others couldn't be bothered. Your parents made their choice a long time ago. This is mine. Be strong, my girl. I cried reading that letter, not tears of sadness, but tears of pure validation. The attorney then handed me a second envelope. It was full of documents, bank statements detailing the $2,500 monthly payments Grandpa had been sending Eleanor since I was a baby, a sum that continued for over 2 decades. It totaled more than $700,000. There were emails from her begging for more money, texts where she promised to visit and then flaked, and letters from Rob asking for funds for one failed business scheme after another. It was a complete paper trail of their greed and neglect. Your grandfather anticipated they might challenge the will, the attorney explained. He wanted you to be prepared with the facts. He was a brilliant man, because right on cue, 30 days later, my own attorney, David, called me. Eleanor and Rob had filed a lawsuit. They were claiming undue influence. They were alleging that Grandpa was not of sound mind, that I had manipulated a vulnerable old man, and that they were entitled to their rightful share. I actually let out a laugh. I was in the middle of prosecuting a complex securities fraud case when I got the news. The irony was almost too perfect. They still saw me as that helpless, abandoned baby. They thought they could bully me into submission. They had no idea I'd spent the last decade putting people just like them, people who believed the law didn't apply to them, behind bars. They had no idea their own father-in-law had been preparing me for this exact fight my entire life. And they certainly had no idea who Judge Samuel Croft was, which brings us right back to that courtroom. That stunning moment of recognition. Judge Croft had clerked for my grandfather 24 years ago, long before he took the bench himself. He knew exactly who I was. He knew I was a senior prosecutor. He knew what Grandpa Arthur meant to me. And he knew that the 2 people suing me were the same 2 people who couldn't even be bothered to visit a dying man. My mother's lawyer, a slick-looking man named Edward Finn, who specialized in weaving emotional sob stories when the facts weren't on his side, rose to his feet. Your Honor, before we begin, I must disclose that I had a professional relationship with the late Judge Pierce. If either party objects to my presiding over this case, you should speak now." I watched Finn lean over and whisper frantically to my parents. Eleanor's face went pale with nerves. Rob just looked irritated. Finally, Finn stood up straight. "No objection, Your Honor. A colossal mistake." Judge Croft simply nodded. "Very well. Let's proceed, Mr. Finn. You may begin with your opening statement." And that's when the real show began. Growing up in my grandparents' house was like living in a different reality from whatever world my parents occupied. And frankly, it was the best thing that could have ever happened to me. One of my earliest memories is being about 4 years old, perched on a stool in Grandma Kate's kitchen while we made oatmeal raisin cookies. She always let me add far more raisins than the recipe called for, never once getting impatient. She'd just laugh and say that the best cookies were made with extra love and extra raisins. Grandpa Arthur would sometimes come home from court still in his judicial robe, scoop me up, flour dusting my hair and all, and ask about my day as if I were the most interesting person on the planet. I'd tell him about a ladybug I'd found or a new color I'd learned, and he'd listen with the same focused intensity he gave to oral arguments in his courtroom. They never, not once, spoke ill of my parents in front of me. When I'd ask why my mommy and daddy didn't live with us, Grandma would just say they were busy with very important work. For years, I believed her. Kids believe what they're told, especially when the people telling them are kind. But I wasn't naive. I started noticing things. I saw how other kids' parents were at every school function, while mine were nowhere to be found. I heard my friends talk about their family movie nights, while I spent my evenings with 2 people who were in bed by 9. The birthday cards from Eleanor and Rob would arrive weeks late, filled with generic messages that felt like they were written by a stranger. The first time it really hit me that something was deeply wrong, I was 7. It was the annual holiday play at school. I had a small speaking part, 2 whole lines. I'd practiced for weeks. Grandma and Grandpa were right there in the front row, Grandpa with his clunky video camera, and Grandma clutching a bouquet of flowers from her garden. After the show, I saw my friend Jessica with both of her parents, laughing and taking pictures. I turned to my grandparents and asked why my mommy and daddy hadn't come. Grandma Kate's face did this thing where her mouth tried to smile, but her eyes were filled with sadness. "They wanted to be here, sweetheart," she said softly. "They just couldn't get away this time." But I knew. I had overheard her on the phone with Eleanor the week before, a one-sided conversation about the play, followed by a long silence and some vague excuse about Rob's company holiday party. I learned to stop asking after that day. When I was 8, Grandpa taught me to play chess. We'd spend our Sunday afternoons hunched over the board, him patiently explaining strategy, teaching me to think 3 moves ahead. He never just let me win, which used to infuriate me. But the day I finally beat him legitimately when I was 12, he was so proud he called half the people in his address book to brag. Grandma Kate taught me how to garden. We had a little patch of the yard that was all ours, where we grew tomatoes, bell peppers, and all sorts of herbs. She taught me how to feel the soil to know if it needed water, how patience and consistent care could create something beautiful. I didn't realize it then, but she was teaching me about life, not just about plants. They came to every single soccer game, every piano recital, every debate tournament. Grandpa would clear his entire calendar, no matter what important case he was hearing. Grandma would make elaborate snacks and hold up signs with my name on them. They always cheered louder than anyone else. I used to be so embarrassed by their unbridled enthusiasm. Now, I would give anything to hear Grandpa's booming voice from the sidelines just one more time. Eleanor and Rob made their obligatory appearances, maybe twice a year if I was lucky. They'd arrive bearing expensive gifts that felt more like a transaction than a gesture of love. Designer clothes I would never wear, the latest electronics I didn't need, gifts that screamed, "We spent money on you, so our duty is fulfilled." I remember one Christmas when I was 10. Eleanor showed up wearing a ridiculous fur-trimmed coat, talking on her phone the entire time. She barely glanced at me as she handed over a beautifully wrapped box. Inside was a designer handbag. I was 10. What was I going to do with a designer handbag? When I tried to politely say thank you, she just waved a dismissive hand. "Well, if you don't like it, just give it to a friend." "Whatever." Grandma Kate caught my eye from across the room, her jaw tightening. But she didn't say a word. She just walked over, wrapped an arm around my shoulder, and suggested we go check on the pie in the oven. In the kitchen, she hugged me close. "Some people show love with presents," she whispered. "And some people show love by being present. Both are ways of showing you care, but one of them matters a whole lot more." Rob was even worse. He usually wouldn't even come inside. He'd wait in the car, honking the horn until Eleanor came out. The few times Grandpa managed to coax him into the house, the tension was so thick you could cut it with a knife. It was obvious Grandpa had zero respect for him, and Rob knew it. I remember being about 12 and overhearing them arguing. Rob had just dropped Eleanor off after a visit, and Grandpa met him at the door. "One day that girl is going to be a woman," Grandpa said, his voice dangerously quiet, which is how I always knew he was truly angry. "And she is going to remember who showed up for her. You still have a chance to change what she remembers." Rob actually laughed, a short, sharp, dismissive sound. "Save the lecture, Your Honor. Eleanor and I are doing just fine. Claire's taken care of. That's what's important." "Taken care of?" Grandpa repeated slowly. "Is that what you call this? Writing a check? That's parenting to you?" "It's more than you ever did for Eleanor," Rob shot back. It was the wrong thing to say. Grandpa's face went rigid. "I raised my daughter. I was at every game, every recital, every single moment. She's the one who chose to abandon hers. Don't you dare stand there and suggest that I'm the failure in this situation." Rob left and never tried to come inside the house again. As I got older, the visits became even more strained. Eleanor usually came alone. Rob was always too busy with some new, doomed business venture to see his only child. I think I stopped caring around the age of 15. By then, I had accepted the reality of the situation. They weren't my parents. They were just two people with whom I happened to share some DNA. I excelled in school. Grandpa reviewed my report cards like they were legal briefs submitted to his court. Straight A's meant dinner at my favorite Italian restaurant. Winning a state debate championship meant a trip to Washington, D.C. to watch actual oral arguments before the Supreme Court. He made learning feel like the most important thing in the world. When I was accepted into Northwestern University on a full academic scholarship, Grandma Kate cried tears of joy. Eleanor sent a text message. "Congrats," one word. That was it. College was the first time I was ever really away from my grandparents. I called home every Sunday without fail. Grandma would tell me about her garden and the neighborhood gossip, all the mundane little things that felt important because she cared enough to share them. Grandpa would grill me about my classes, my professors, and whether I was being sufficiently challenged. Then, sophomore year, Grandma had the heart attack. It was massive and came out of nowhere. She was planting tulip bulbs in the front yard when it happened. A neighbor found her. I got the call from Grandpa while I was in the middle of a lecture. His voice was so small, so utterly broken. "She's gone, Claire. She's gone." I drove home that night, a 6-hour drive through the darkness, sobbing the entire way. When I got there, Grandpa was sitting in her garden, just staring into the night, holding one of the tulip bulbs she never got to plant. I sat down beside him, and we just stayed there together, in silence, until the sun came up. Eleanor and Rob came to the funeral. They stayed for the service and left immediately after. They didn't help with any of the arrangements. They didn't help Grandpa sort through Grandma's belongings. They just showed up long enough to be seen and then disappeared again. That was the moment I stopped making excuses for them. That was when I finally accepted that some people are just fundamentally selfish, and there's nothing you can do to change it. Grandpa and I had to learn how to live without her. The house was never the same, of course, but we had each other. Those Sunday dinners became more sacred than ever. Sometimes he'd cook, usually his famous grilled cheese. Sometimes I'd cook, experimenting with Grandma's old recipes. And sometimes we'd just order a pizza and eat it out of the box while watching an old black and white movie. The food was never the point. It was the conversation. He started talking to me about his work in a way he never had before. He told me about the cases that haunted him, the decisions that kept him up at night, the incredible weight of knowing that your ruling could alter the entire course of someone's life. The law is supposed to be blind, he said one Sunday over Chinese takeout, but the people who interpret it are not. We all bring our own experiences, our prejudices, our humanity to every decision we make. The trick, Claire, is knowing when your humanity is making you more just and when it's making you biased. I absorbed every word like a sponge. You're going to be a judge one day, he told me once. I was 23, barely surviving the rigors of law school, but he was completely serious. You have that one thing that can't be taught, he said, integrity, the ability to see what is right even when it's not easy, especially when it costs you something. After Grandma died, something fundamental shifted between Grandpa and me. We became partners in a way, two people bound by a shared loss who chose to carry the weight together instead of alone. The house was emptier without her, but it was never lonely. We filled it with memories and conversation, and this unspoken understanding that we were all each other had left. Law school was a grind, but I loved it. Every late night in the library, every mock trial, every moment I felt like quitting, I would just think of Grandpa. I thought about the legacy he was building, not just in the nation's courtrooms, but in me. I graduated summa cum laude. He was right there in the front row, camera in hand. My parents weren't there. They sent a card. I had stopped being surprised by their absence years ago. Getting that prosecutor position right out of law school was Grandpa's doing, though I didn't realize it at the time. I thought I had earned it entirely on my own merits. Strong recommendations, top grades, a great interview. I found out years later that he had made a few discreet calls, vouching for me personally, promising that I wouldn't let them down. I made sure I didn't. I worked harder than anyone else in that office. I stayed late, came in early, and took on the complex, politically sensitive cases that other prosecutors shied away from. Within 2 years, I was handling major white-collar crime, financial fraud, and public corruption cases. I quickly developed a reputation for being thorough, prepared, and absolutely relentless. The job consumed me. 70-hour weeks became my new normal. I lived on black coffee, takeout, and the deep satisfaction of seeing guilty people finally face consequences. My personal life was non-existent. No dating, no happy hours with colleagues. There was no time for anything but work and my Sunday dinners with Grandpa. Those dinners remained our sacred ritual. No matter how exhausted I was, I always showed up. And he never missed one either. even as he entered his 80s and started moving a little slower. Eleanor called me once during that time. I was 28 and hadn't spoken to her in at least 3 years. She wanted help with some legal trouble Rob had gotten into, a dispute with a business partner. I asked her how she even got my number. She said Grandpa gave it to her. I made a mental note to have a talk with him about boundaries. I then told her I was a criminal prosecutor, not a civil attorney, and that even if I were, I wouldn't lift a finger to help Rob with anything. She called me ungrateful. I hung up the phone. Grandpa apologized to me later. She backed me into a corner, he said, looking tired. Started crying about how her own daughter won't even speak to her. I should have known better. I wasn't mad at him. Eleanor was a master manipulator. She always had been. It's fine, Grandpa, but please, don't give her any more information about my life. She lost the right to know those things a long, long time ago. When I turned 30, Grandpa threw me a small birthday party at the house. It was just a few of his closest friends, people I had grown up around. Judge Samuel Croft was there. He had clerked for Grandpa 24 years earlier and had since become a highly respected judge in his own right. We talked for a long time that night about the law, about fascinating cases, about the challenge of maintaining your ethics in a system that often rewards compromise. Your grandfather talks about you constantly, he told me, a warm smile on his face. He is incredibly proud of the woman you've become. My throat tightened. Grandpa rarely expressed his pride so directly to me. Knowing he said it to others meant the world. He saved me, I said quietly. Him and my grandmother. They gave me a life. Judge Croft nodded. He told me about your parents, about how they left you. I'm sorry you had to go through that. Don't be, I replied honestly. If they had raised me, I'd be a completely different person, and I'm certain I wouldn't be a better one. Looking back, I don't think I ever fully grasped how much Grandpa sacrificed to raise me. He was 55 when I came to live with him permanently, an age when most people are starting to plan for a quieter, easier life. Instead, he got an infant, then a toddler, then a moody teenager. And he never once complained. He just showed up every single day and loved me. Eleanor resented him for it. I know she did. She saw the relationship we had and felt threatened by it, as if Grandpa loving me somehow meant he loved her less. She could never understand that love isn't a zero-sum game. You don't have to choose. You can love your daughter and your granddaughter. You can be deeply disappointed in one while being immensely proud of the other. But Eleanor always had to be the victim in her own narrative. Her parents died when she was young, so she was sent away. She got pregnant at 18, so she felt trapped. She had to leave me with her parents, so she was persecuted. It was never her fault, never her responsibility. It was always someone else's failure that forced her hand. I used to feel sorry for her back when I was younger and still held out a sliver of hope that she might one day become the mother I wanted. But somewhere around my 25th birthday, that pity finally hardened into acceptance. She was who she was. She wasn't going to change, and I no longer needed her to. Grandpa retired when I was 27 after 40 years on the bench. It was a huge deal. There was news coverage, retirement parties, and tributes from every legal organization in the state. He was gracious through it all, but I could tell he was ready to stop carrying the weight of other people's problems, ready to just be a person again instead of an institution. We made plans to travel, Italy, Ireland, maybe a cruise to Alaska. He had a whole list of places he wanted to see, but then his health began a slow, steady decline. It was nothing dramatic, just the accumulation of 80-plus years, fatigue, aches and pains, a general slowing down. He never complained, but I noticed. I started visiting more often, not just on Sundays. I'd bring dinner over on weeknights, make sure he was taking his medications. He protested at first, insisting I was treating him like an invalid, but I knew he secretly appreciated it. The house was so quiet without Grandma, and without work to fill his days, he needed someone to talk to. We'd spend our evenings talking about everything and nothing, politics, old cases he'd presided over, people we knew. Sometimes we'd just sit in comfortable silence, him reading a book, me reviewing case files. Just being in the same room was enough. You know, he said to me one night, looking up from his book, "Raising you was the greatest privilege of my life." I looked up from my papers and his expression was soft, almost wistful. "I mean that, Claire. Your grandmother and I, we got to be parents twice. First with Eleanor and then with you. And to be honest, the second time was better. Maybe because we were older and wiser. Maybe because we knew just how fast it all goes by. Or maybe," he paused, a small smile playing on his lips, "maybe it's just because you were an extraordinary kid who made it so easy to love you." I felt tears welling up in my eyes. "You and Grandma saved me," I whispered. "I have no idea what would have happened to me if you hadn't stepped in." He just shook his head. "We didn't save you, Claire. We just loved you. You're the one who saved yourself. You decided who you wanted to be. In spite of everything, that was all you." Those conversations are what I miss the most. That feeling of being completely known and completely accepted by someone. Having a person in your life who believes in you unconditionally. Not many people get to experience that even once in their lives. I got it twice. When Eleanor would occasionally call him, he was always cordial. He never spoke badly of her to me, but I could hear the disappointment in his voice after those calls, the sadness that his daughter had become someone he barely recognized, someone who only ever called when she needed something, usually money. And he gave it to her every single time, not because she deserved it, but because he was her father and he couldn't help himself. I asked him once why he kept sending her money. "She just wastes it on frivolous things, Grandpa. She doesn't appreciate it." He sighed a heavy, weary sound. "I know, but she's still my daughter, and I still have a little bit of hope that maybe, one day, she'll figure out what actually matters in life." It's not about the money, Claire. It's about the hope. Have you ever had someone in your family who consistently took advantage of another's generosity without ever giving anything back? How did you deal with it? Share your thoughts in the comments below. Mr. Finn's opening statement was a masterwork of pure fiction. And believe me, I've prosecuted enough professional liars to recognize true talent when I see it. The man was a gifted storyteller. He painted Eleanor as this devoted, loving daughter who was cruelly kept apart from her ailing father by manipulative grandparents who had poisoned the relationship from the start. He described me as a cold, calculating opportunist who had isolated an elderly man and inserted herself as his sole caregiver for the express purpose of securing his inheritance. Judge Pierce was suffering from profound grief after losing his wife of 60 years, Finn argued, his voice dripping with synthetic sympathy. He was vulnerable. He was depressed. And the defendant, Claire Pierce, exploited that vulnerability. She manipulated him into believing she was the only one who truly cared for him. This will does not reflect Judge Pierce's true wishes. It reflects Ms. Pierce's calculated and heartless campaign to inherit his entire fortune. I kept my face a perfect mask of neutrality, but inside, I was meticulously cataloging every single distortion, every outright lie, for the cross-examination that I knew was coming. Then my lawyer, David, stood for our opening. He didn't need theatrics. The facts of the case were damning enough on their own. "Your Honor," he began, his tone calm and direct, "this case is remarkably simple. Judge Arthur Pierce was a brilliant, meticulous, and intentional man. He left his estate to the one person who earned it, not through manipulation, but through 33 years of consistent love and unwavering presence. The evidence will clearly show that the plaintiffs, Eleanor and Robert Vance, received over $700,000 from Judge Pierce during his lifetime, while barely managing to maintain contact with him. Meanwhile, the defendant, Claire Pierce, showed up. Every single day, Judge Croft looked at Finn. "Call your first witness." The plaintiff calls Eleanor Vance to the stand. My mother stood, carefully smoothing down her conservative black dress. She had dressed for the part of the grieving daughter, minimal makeup, her hair pulled back in a severe bun. She almost looked convincing if you didn't know the real story. She took the oath and sat down. Finn approached her with a practiced gentleness. "Mrs. Vance, could you please describe your relationship with your father for the court?" Eleanor's voice quavered on cue. "He was my everything, my hero. When my parents died in a tragic car accident when I was only 8, he and my grandmother took me in. They raised me. They gave me a home, all true so far. But the convenient omissions were about to begin. And when you had your daughter, Claire, what was your father's involvement?" "Oh, he was so thrilled to be a grandfather," Eleanor said, dabbing at her eyes with a tissue she seemed to produce from nowhere. Was she carrying it specifically for this performance? He wanted to help in any way he could. I was so young, you see, just 18, still trying to figure out my life. When he offered to watch Claire while Rob and I got ourselves established, I thought it was only going to be temporary. Temporary. That was an interesting way to spin it. Finn nodded sympathetically. "But it became permanent, didn't it?" "Yes," Eleanor said, her voice cracking. "They kept her. They made it seem like Rob and I were terrible parents just for wanting to have careers. They made me feel guilty every single time I couldn't visit. They slowly turned my own daughter against me. I kept my expression blank, but in my mind, I was shredding every word she uttered. David glanced over at me, and I gave him a subtle nod. I was fine. Let her dig the hole deeper. After your mother passed away, did your relationship with your father change? Finn continued. He withdrew, Eleanor claimed. He became cold. He seemed to blame me somehow for not being there enough. But I tried. I called him. I visited when I could. He pushed me away and pulled Claire closer. Judge Croft was taking notes, his expression completely unreadable. When did you find out about the contents of the will? After the funeral, Eleanor said. I was already grieving the loss of my father, and then I find out he left me nothing. He had cut off the monthly support he'd always given me and gave every last penny to Claire. I was devastated. It felt like one final cruel rejection. Finn turned to face the judge. It is our contention, Your Honor, that Judge Pierce was unduly influenced by the defendant, that she isolated him and manipulated him during a period of extreme vulnerability. This will does not reflect his true intentions. David stood up. Objection. Counsel is testifying. Sustained, Judge Croft said flatly. Ask questions, Mr. Finn. No further questions, Your Honor. Judge Croft looked at my lawyer. Cross-examination, Mr. Chen? Yes, Your Honor. David stood and approached my mother, his demeanor professional and direct. There was no smile on his face. Mrs. Vance, you were 18 years old when Claire was born, is that correct? Yes. And you voluntarily left her in the care of your parents when she was 3 months old? Well, it wasn't that simple. A yes or no answer will suffice, Mrs. Vance. Yes. But thank you. David pulled out a large bound calendar. Your father, Judge Pierce, kept meticulous records. According to his calendar, you visited Claire a total of 4 times during her first year of life. Christmas, Easter, her first birthday, and 1 Saturday in July. Is that accurate? Eleanor's face flushed. I was dealing with a lot. I was young. I was trying to support Rob's career. Of course, let's talk about that career. Your husband was a professional baseball player at the time, correct? Yes. And according to these tax records, he was earning a substantial income. Yet you still required monthly financial assistance from your father? We had expenses that his salary couldn't cover. David pulled out a stack of bank statements. Your father gave you $2,500 a month every month, starting when Claire was just an infant and continuing for over 20 years. That comes to over $700,000, Mrs. Vance. What exactly was that money used for? Finn shot up. Objection. Relevance. The plaintiffs are claiming they deserve a share of the estate. I am establishing what they have already received, David argued calmly. Overruled. Answer the question, Mrs. Vance. Eleanor shifted uncomfortably in her seat. Living expenses, rent, food, normal things. Did you hold a job during this time? Occasionally. I worked in retail. And your husband? He tried to start several businesses after his baseball career ended. Tried, David repeated. A sports bar that went under in 11 months. A sports memorabilia shop that filed for bankruptcy in less than 2 years. And each time one of these ventures failed, your father gave you additional money on top of the monthly allowance. Is that correct? He wanted to help, Eleanor said weakly. He wanted to help you become independent, David corrected. But you chose to become dependent instead. In the last 10 years of your father's life, Mrs. Vance, how many times did you see him? I don't know the exact number. Several times. David produced another document. According to his calendar, you saw him 8 times. In 10 years. That's less than once a year. And you call that the behavior of a devoted daughter? I was busy. I had my own life, Eleanor protested. Your own life, David echoed. Did that life include calling him on his birthday? Silence. I'll take that as a no. What about on Father's Day? Christmas? Did you ever send cards? Gifts? Sometimes, Eleanor whispered. Sometimes. Mrs. Vance, when was the last time you saw your father before he passed away? A long, heavy silence filled the room. I don't remember exactly. It was on his 85th birthday, 3 years before his death. You were there for 90 minutes and left before they served the cake. You did not see him again until his funeral. Is that correct? I think so, yes. David let that fact hang in the air. One final question. You testified that your father pushed you away after your mother died. But isn't it true that you stopped coming around when he informed you that while the monthly payments would continue, he would no longer be bailing out your husband's failed businesses? Isn't it true that after he retired and told you the extra funds would stop, you visited him exactly 0 times in the following year? True or false, Mrs. Vance? He was angry with me. Or perhaps, Mrs. Vance, you simply had no more use for him? David said quietly, no further questions. Rob took the stand next, and he somehow managed to look even less interested than he usually did. He fidgeted in his ill-fitting suit like a teenager forced to go to church. Finn started with the same softballs. Mr. Vance, please describe your relationship with Judge Pierce. We got along fine, Rob mumbled. Translation, they tolerated each other's existence for approximately 90 seconds at a time. I didn't see him much because of my baseball career, lots of travel. But I respected him. That was rich, coming from a man who actively avoided setting foot in his house for 2 decades. Finn walked him through the same tired victim narrative, how they tried to be involved, how Grandpa Arthur made it difficult, how they felt pushed out of their own daughter's life. Rob was even less convincing than Eleanor. He kept glancing at the clock on the wall as if he had somewhere more important to be. This was all just an inconvenience to him, and it was painfully obvious to everyone in the room. David's cross-examination was surgical. "Mr. Vance, you testified that you wanted to be involved in Claire's life." "Yes." "How many of her school events did you attend?" Rob blinked. "I don't know. A few." "Can you name one?" Silence. Rob looked helplessly at Finn, who could offer no assistance. "I was on the road a lot with baseball. Your baseball career ended when Claire was 8 years old. After that, you lived just 2 hours away. How often did you see her then?" "We had visits." "How many?" David pressed. "I'm asking for a number, Mr. Vance." "I don't remember exactly. Would it surprise you to learn that according to Claire's own recollection, you came inside Judge Pierce's house fewer than 5 times in 24 years? That you usually just waited in the car?" Rob's jaw tightened. "It was a tense house. Judge Pierce didn't like me." "And why do you think he didn't like you?" "I don't know. He was a judgmental guy." "Or perhaps," David said, pulling out yet another stack of documents, "he judged you for abandoning your daughter and then repeatedly asking him for money every time one of your businesses failed. Let's talk about those failures, shall we? 3 different ventures, 3 bankruptcies, and each time you asked Judge Pierce for financial assistance, correct?" He offered after you asked," David interrupted, "and he gave you that money despite barely tolerating your presence. Why do you think he did that? Because he loved his daughter and wanted to help her. Even when she was married to someone he didn't respect. Even when that person never once showed up for his own granddaughter. And now, after all that, you're here claiming you deserve more?" Rob's face turned a blotchy red. "We're his family. We deserve something." "Family," David repeated slowly. "When Claire graduated from high school, did you attend?" I think so." "You think so?" David projected a photograph onto the large screen in the courtroom. It was a picture from her graduation. There was Grandpa Arthur in the front row, beaming. There was Grandma Kate, dabbing her eyes. "Where are you in this picture, Mr. Vance? I might have had something else that day. You didn't come. You also missed her college graduation and her law school graduation. You missed every single significant moment of her life. And now you want half of the estate that was earned by the man who actually showed up for her?" Finn jumped to his feet. "Objection. Argumentative. Sustained," Judge Croft said. "Move on, Mr. Chen." David nodded. No further questions. Finn's next witness was a surprise. Dr. Raymond Hughes, a psychiatrist who had never even met my grandfather. They were actually going to try the incompetence angle. It was a bold and frankly stupid move considering how many people could testify to the contrary. "Dr. Hughes," Finn began, "based on your review of his medical records, can you speak to Judge Pierce's mental state in his final years?" Based on the records, Judge Pierce showed signs of clinical depression following the death of his wife. Depression in elderly patients can often lead to impaired judgment, particularly when it comes to relationships and financial decisions. So, in your professional opinion, he could have been unduly influenced? It's certainly possible. Elderly individuals experiencing grief-related depression are highly vulnerable to suggestion, especially from caregivers they see on a regular basis. David stood for the cross. "Dr. Hughes, you never met Judge Parker, did you?" "That's correct. You never evaluated him, spoke to him, or observed him in any capacity?" I'm basing my opinion on his medical records. The medical records that show standard checkups with normal cognitive results for a man his age? Yes. But the depression. Where in these medical records is a diagnosis of depression actually made? Dr. Hughes shuffled through his papers. Well, it's not explicitly stated, but given the circumstances of his wife's passing. So let me be clear. You have diagnosed a man you never met with a clinical condition that is not present in his medical records, and you have used that imaginary diagnosis to question his mental competency before this court? I am offering my professional opinion. An opinion based on absolutely nothing, David said dismissively. No further questions. Finn looked flustered. He called a neighbor who testified that Grandpa seemed a bit withdrawn in his final years, and a distant cousin who claimed Grandpa once said he wished Eleanor visited more often. Neither testimony did much to help their case. Then it was our turn. David called Judge Andrew Mitchell, who had served on the appeals court with Grandpa for over 20 years. Judge Mitchell, did you ever observe any decline in Judge Pierce's mental faculties? Absolutely not, Judge Mitchell said firmly. Arthur was sharp as a tack until the very end. We had lunch together regularly. We discussed complex legal theories, debated current events. His mind was as clear at 88 as it was at 60. Did he ever discuss his estate plans with you? He did. He told me he was leaving everything to Claire. He said she had earned it through years of unwavering devotion. He was very clear about his intentions. There was no confusion, no coercion. Just a man making sure the person who actually cared for him would be taken care of. Objection, Finn shouted. Sustained. David called 3 more witnesses, all close friends of Grandpa's, all of whom testified to his mental sharpness and confirmed that he had openly discussed his will and had been completely intentional about his decisions. Then David called the attorney who had drafted Grandpa's will, a woman named Margaret Chen, who had been his estate attorney for 30 years. Ms. Chen, please walk us through the process of creating Judge Pierce's final will. He contacted me 2 years before his death, wanting to update everything. We met on multiple occasions. He was very, very specific. He wanted Claire to inherit the entire estate, and he wanted Eleanor's monthly allowance to be terminated upon his death. He anticipated that this might be contested, so he specifically included language in the will affirming his sound mind and clear intentions. Did he seem confused or coerced in any way? Not in the slightest. He was methodical. He brought in documentation to support all of his decisions. He wanted to ensure there were no ambiguities. What kind of documentation? Records of the financial support he had given to his daughter over the years. Calendars showing the frequency of her visits. He wanted to make sure that if this ever went to court, the truth would be perfectly clear. Finn had nothing for her on cross-examination. Margaret Chen was unshakable. As the court recessed for the day, I caught my mother's eye. She looked away quickly. Good. She should be uncomfortable. Tomorrow I would take the stand. Tomorrow I would finally get to say everything I had wanted to say for 33 years, under oath, on the record, and with a judge who already knew the truth. What do you think is going to happen when Claire finally takes the stand? Drop your predictions in the comments, and don't forget to subscribe for the final part of the story. I woke up early the next morning, my nerves humming not with fear but with anticipation. Today was the day. Today I would finally tell my truth, and they would have no choice but to sit there and listen. I dressed with care. A navy blue suit, simple pearl earrings, my hair pulled back. I wanted to look professional, credible, like someone who had earned every single penny. David met me at the courthouse. Ready for this? He asked. More than ready. Just remember, tell the truth. Don't let Finn get under your skin. I managed a small smile. David, I prosecute mobsters for a living. I think I can handle a little hostile questioning. He laughed. Fair enough. Let's go. The courtroom was filling up quickly. Word had clearly spread. Grandpa had been a well-known figure, and people were curious. Judge Croft took the bench. Mr. Chen, you may call your next witness. David stood. The defense calls Claire Pierce to the stand. I walked to the witness box, raised my right hand, and swore to tell the truth. Finally, David began gently. Claire, tell the court about your childhood. I took a deep breath. I was born when my mother was 18. She and my father decided they weren't ready for a child. When I was 3 months old, they brought me to my grandparents' house. What was supposed to be a temporary arrangement became permanent. They left, and they rarely came back. How often did they visit? When I was very young, maybe a few times a year. As I got older, it became less frequent. By the time I was a teenager, it was maybe twice a year, if I was lucky. Christmas, and sometimes my birthday. My father visited even less than that. How did that affect you? I learned very early on that I couldn't rely on them, but I had my grandparents. They showed up for everything. School plays, soccer games, debate tournaments. They helped me with my homework, taught me how to cook, took me to museums. They were my parents in every way that truly mattered. Did Eleanor and Rob contribute financially to your upbringing? Number. My grandparents paid for everything. My clothes, my school supplies, my college tuition, my law school education, everything. My parents took money from my grandfather, but they never gave anything. David walked me through my entire childhood. Every missed holiday, every broken promise, every unanswered phone call. The Christmas Eleanor spent on her phone, the Father's Day. Rob didn't bother to call. I kept my voice steady and factual, not asking for sympathy, just establishing the undeniable pattern. When your grandmother passed away, what happened? I took a semester off from college to be with my grandfather. He was completely devastated. They had been married for 60 years. I couldn't leave him alone. Did your mother help? She came to the funeral. She left immediately after the service. She didn't help with any of the arrangements, and she didn't check on him once in the weeks that followed. I ended up moving back home for 6 months just to make sure he was okay. And after that, we grew even closer. I called him every day and visited every Sunday for dinner without fail. When he retired, we spent even more time together. He mentored me in my career. He taught me everything I know about the law. He was my grandfather, but he was also my best friend. My voice caught slightly on the last words. I cleared my throat and continued. When did you learn about the contents of the will? At the reading, a week after he passed. I was completely shocked. I was expecting a few personal items. I had no idea he had accumulated that much wealth, and I certainly didn't know he was planning to leave it all to me. Did you ever discuss the will with him? Never. He never told me what his plans were. I think he wanted to be sure that I loved him for who he was, without any ulterior motives. Which I did. What would you say to the accusation that you manipulated him? I looked directly at my mother, whose face was a mask of strained piety. I spent 3 decades of my life showing up. I didn't manipulate him, I loved him. There's a profound difference. David sat down. Now it was Finn's turn. He stood up slowly, with that look lawyers get when they think they've found a clever angle. Ms. Pierce, you testified that you saw your parents rarely. But couldn't you, as an adult, have reached out more? Couldn't you have tried harder to foster a relationship? I was a child for most of that time, I replied calmly. Children don't arrange visits. Parents do. And as an adult, I realized they simply weren't interested. They only ever called when they needed money. They only ever showed up when it was convenient for them. I stopped chasing people who clearly didn't want to be caught. Finn paced in front of the witness box. You paint yourself as this devoted granddaughter. But isn't it possible that you intentionally isolated your grandfather from his own daughter? That you made yourself indispensable so that he would leave you his money? I didn't need to isolate him. They isolated themselves. My grandfather made his own decisions based on a very simple criterion. Who actually showed up for him? You were ambitious. You went to law school. You became a prosecutor, all with his help, all with his connections. Weren't you just using him to advance your own career? A flicker of anger simmered beneath my calm exterior. My grandfather mentored me because he wanted to, because he was proud of me, because watching me succeed brought him joy. That's not manipulation, Mr. Finn. That's family. Finn tried a few different angles. He suggested I had poisoned Grandpa against Eleanor. He suggested I had deliberately kept them away. He suggested I had convinced Grandpa to cut her off financially. I shut down every attempt with calm, factual responses. Isn't it true that you benefited financially from your relationship with him? Finn tried, getting desperate. In what way? He paid for your education, your living expenses, everything. Yes, he did. Because I was his granddaughter and he wanted to provide for me. Just like he gave my mother over $700,000 over the course of 20-plus years. The difference, Mr. Finn, is that I was actually present in his life. I didn't just take his money. I gave him my time, my love, my companionship. What did she give him? Objection, Finn shouted. Argumentative. Sustained, Judge Croft said, but the point had been made. Finn tried to regain his footing. Let's talk about his final year. You visited him frequently. Some might say too frequently. Were you checking on his mental state, making sure he didn't change the will? I visited him because I loved him and he was alone. If I had cared about the will, I would have asked him about it. I never did. He made his own decisions without any input from me. How convenient, Finn sneered. Ms. Pierce, isn't it true that you knew exactly what you stood to inherit? That you spent years positioning yourself for this very moment? I leaned forward slightly. Mr. Palmer, I spent years loving my grandfather. If my primary motivation was inheritance, I wasted a tremendous amount of time. I could have been out building my own wealth instead of having dinner with an old man every Sunday, but I chose him because he was worth more to me than any amount of money. That's something your clients have never understood. Finn's face turned beet red. No further questions. I stepped down from the stand and returned to my seat. David leaned over. You were great. I just nodded, my eyes fixed on my mother. She was crying. Real tears this time. Was it genuine remorse or was she just realizing she was about to lose? With Eleanor, it was always hard to tell. Judge Croft looked at both attorneys. Anything else? David stood. Just one more piece of evidence, Your Honor. He projected a series of images onto the screen. They were photographs from my childhood. Grandpa at my soccer games, Grandma at my recitals, me and Grandpa at my graduations. Every major life moment documented. Notice who's missing from every single one of these photos, David said. Eleanor and Robert Vance. Not because they were excluded, but because they chose not to be there. Then he put up the financial records. Every payment to Eleanor, every desperate email asking for more money, every broken promise to visit. The evidence was overwhelming. Judge Croft studied everything carefully. I've seen enough, he said finally. We'll recess until tomorrow morning for closing arguments and my ruling. As we left the courtroom, I felt a weight lifting off my shoulders. I had said everything I needed to say. The truth was out. Now, we just had to wait for justice. Closing arguments were scheduled for 9 a.m. I barely slept that night, but it wasn't from worry. It was from anticipation. This was almost over. One way or another, the next day I would know if Grandpa's final wishes would be honored, or if my parents would succeed in rewriting history. The courtroom was packed when we arrived. Estate disputes aren't typically this riveting, but when you add a prominent retired judge, a prosecutor granddaughter, and decades of family dysfunction into the mix, suddenly everyone wants a front row seat. Judge Croft took the bench precisely on time. "Mr. Finn, your closing argument." Finn stood and launched into his final, desperate appeal. He talked about blood being thicker than water, about how Eleanor was Grandpa's only daughter and deserved to be considered, about how I was just the granddaughter, as if love and loyalty were somehow less valuable because of a generational gap. Judge Pierce was a man suffering from profound grief, Finn argued. He had lost his wife of 60 years. He was vulnerable, depressed, and susceptible to influence. The defendant took advantage of that vulnerability. She isolated him from his daughter. She positioned herself as his sole caregiver. She manipulated him into believing she was the only one who cared. This will is not a reflection of Judge Pierce's true wishes. It's a reflection of Claire Pierce's calculated campaign to inherit his wealth. He went on like that for 20 minutes, weaving a narrative that had no basis in reality, but sounded convincing if you hadn't heard the actual facts. When he sat down, David stood. He didn't need any dramatic flair. The facts spoke for themselves. Your Honor, this case is, in fact, very simple. Judge Arthur Pierce was a brilliant legal mind who spent 40 years of his life making carefully considered decisions. His will was no different. He left his estate to the person who earned it, not through manipulation, but through decades of consistent love and unwavering presence. David then walked the judge methodically through the evidence, the documentation of Eleanor's neglect, the financial records proving she had taken hundreds of thousands of dollars while giving nothing in return, the testimony from Grandpa's colleagues and friends confirming his mental clarity, the calendars that proved the Vances' chronic absence. The plaintiffs claim Judge Pierce was unduly influenced, but the evidence shows he was simply making a logical choice based on observed behavior. He gave his daughter every opportunity, every chance to be present, every benefit of the doubt. She consistently failed to show up. Claire Pierce, on the other hand, did show up every single day. That isn't manipulation, Your Honor. That's devotion. David paused, then made a risky but calculated move. Your Honor, you knew Judge Pierce. You clerked for him. You saw his character, his integrity firsthand. Do you truly believe he was the kind of man who could be so easily manipulated by his granddaughter? Or was he the kind of man who made his decisions based on principle and observation? It was a bold move, bringing the judge's personal knowledge into it. But Finn had opened that door when he failed to object to Judge Croft hearing the case in the first place. Judge Croft's expression remained neutral. The court will take a brief recess to review the evidence and render its decision. We all stood as he left the bench. I glanced over at my parents. Rob looked bored, checking his phone as if he were waiting for a dentist appointment. Eleanor looked anxious, her earlier courtroom tears replaced by a look of genuine worry. She should be worried. The 30-minute recess felt like 3 hours. Finally, the bailiff called us back in. Judge Croft returned carrying a thick folder. My heart was pounding. This was it. I have reviewed all of the evidence and testimony very carefully, he began, his voice filling the silent room. This is a difficult case, as it involves family relationships, which are inherently complex and often painful. However, my role is not to judge the quality of these relationships. My role is to determine whether Judge Pierce's will should stand as written. He looked directly at my parents. The plaintiffs have argued that Judge Pierce was both mentally incompetent and unduly influenced. The evidence does not support either of these claims. Multiple credible witnesses testified to his mental clarity. His medical records show no cognitive decline. His own attorney confirmed that he was methodical and intentional in his estate planning. The claim of undue influence requires proof that someone actively controlled or manipulated the testator's decisions. The evidence shows the opposite. Judge Pierce made his own decisions independently based on years of direct observation. Eleanor was crying again. Rob was finally paying attention, his face a mask of anger. Judge Croft continued, "What the evidence does show is a clear and undeniable pattern. A pattern of absence on the part of the plaintiffs and a pattern of presence on the part of the defendant. A pattern of financial taking by the plaintiffs and financial responsibility by the defendant. A pattern of broken promises from the plaintiffs and kept commitments by the defendant. Judge Pierce did not need to be manipulated into seeing this pattern. He lived it for 33 years. My chest felt tight. This was the moment. Therefore, the court finds that Judge Pierce's will is a true and accurate reflection of his intentions, that he possessed full testamentary capacity, and that there was no undue influence. The will stands as written. The plaintiff's petition is denied." Eleanor let out a sob. Rob swore under his breath. But Judge Croft wasn't finished. "Furthermore, I am awarding full attorney's fees to the defendant. The plaintiffs brought this frivolous case to court, and they will bear the cost." My jaw dropped. Not only had I won, but my parents would have to pay for the privilege of losing. David shook my hand. "Congratulations, Claire." I just nodded, unable to speak past the lump of emotion in my throat. As we gathered our things, my mother approached me, mascara streaking down her face. "Claire, please," she begged. "Can we just talk?" I looked at her, really looked at her. She was a mess, her makeup smeared, looking older than her 51 years. For a fleeting moment, I almost felt something. Not sympathy, but a distant kind of pity. "There's nothing to talk about, Eleanor." "I'm your mother," she said desperately, reaching for my arm. I took a step back. "You're the woman who gave birth to me. My mother was Catherine Pierce. My father was Arthur Pierce. They earned those titles by showing up. You're just Eleanor, a stranger who took my grandfather's money for 30 years and then came back wanting more. Please," she whispered. "I made mistakes, but I'm still your mother." "No," I said, my voice firm. "You had every chance to be my mother, every birthday, every Christmas, every Sunday for 33 years. You chose not to show up. You don't get to claim that title now just because there's money on the line." She tried to reach for me again. I took another step back. "Don't contact me again. Don't call me. Don't show up at my house. Don't send letters or emails. We're done. We've been done since I was 3 months old. This just makes it official." I turned and walked out of the courtroom with David. Behind me, I could hear Eleanor sobbing and Rob's angry voice telling her to pull herself together. I didn't look back, not once. For the first time in my entire life, I felt completely and utterly free. Free from hoping they would change. Free from wondering if I was good enough. Free from carrying the weight of their failures. Grandpa had given me one last gift. He had proven to the world, and to me, that I wasn't wrong. That love matters more than blood. that showing up matters more than anything else, that I deserved everything I had received because I had earned it through years of simple, consistent presence. The very first thing I did after leaving the courthouse was drive to the cemetery. I sat on the grass next to my grandparents' headstones. The tulips I had planted months ago were in full bloom. "We won, Grandpa," I said quietly. "They tried to take it all away. They tried to rewrite history, but the truth came out. Your wishes will be honored." The wind rustled the leaves on the trees, and I liked to think it was him, acknowledging me, letting me know he was proud, that he knew I would fight for him just like he had always fought for me. I stayed there for a long time, crying a little, laughing a little, thanking them both for saving me when my own parents couldn't be bothered, and promising to honor their legacy, to use the inheritance wisely, to live a life they would be proud of. As the sun began to set, I finally stood to leave, but not before planting a fresh batch of tulip bulbs around their headstones, a reminder that love endures, that it grows back every single spring, that it survives even when the people we love are gone. I drove home that night feeling lighter than I had in months. Justice had been served, the truth had prevailed, and I could finally move forward without looking back, or so I thought, because life, it turned out, still had a few more surprises in store for me.